Good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's coffee talk. My name is Sean O'Brien, the president of Quick Rate. And as always, I'm pleased to be joined by Steve Huntington. Steve, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks again for joining us this morning for our first installment of Coffee Talk for 2025. We'll talk a little bit about what we saw last year and what we expect this year. But I'm here coming from snowy North Carolina this morning. My name is Steve Huntington. I'm the director of analytics here, and I've spent my entire career working with community financial institutions, and more than half of that now here at Quick Rate.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, as Steve touched on, right? Glad to get 2025 kicked off. I think a lot of the initial discussion will be kind of around what we're seeing and hearing, and then as always, we'll touch on things we're working on here at Quick Analytics. Just a reminder, use the Q&A box or the chat feature. We'll monitor those throughout the discussion and take those at an appropriate break or at the end of the discussion today. We will be sending out a link to today's recording along with a copy of the slides, likely on Monday, maybe later this afternoon, but more likely Monday. But we will get those out to everybody. As always, we'll start with a few polling questions. Certainly appreciate any participation with these that you might offer. Just a few questions today, but we'll go ahead and get them started. 5 to be exact. First one's just around the reserve. Do you expect your reserve to be higher, lower, or about the same at the end of 2025? So we'll just go ahead and give this 30 seconds or so. Great, we'll share these results. 63% of you expect higher, 35% about the same, and 2% lower. So thank you for answering. Next up, past due loans. So are your past due loans higher today than they were a year ago? Okay, let's share these. 77% yes, 23% no. That's kind of in sync with what we're seeing. Let's move on to the next one. A kind of a follow-up question to past due loans. Are you anticipating your past due loans increasing this year? Again, just a simple yes or no question or answer. And 80% of you said yes, 20% no. Thank you again. In regulatory exams, has your ACL CECL process been through a regulatory exam? I suspect for most of you at this point it has, but probably 15 or 20% of you, my guess, probably have not. But we'll see see where we are with that. Uh, 88% have been, 12% no. And then our final question, and again, thank you very much. And we will send out a copy of these or include these results in our email with the copy of the slides and the link to the recording. But just around unfunded commitments, do you have a balance in the reserve for unfunded commitments? 81% of you do, 19% do not. So again, thank you very much for participating in our polling questions this morning. And we'll get started here. And I think where we really want to start is just around, kind of with the buzz, if you will, like what we're hearing, what we're seeing as we're speaking to credit unions. I think a lot of what we are seeing is really just more questions about your process. One of the thoughts on asking the question of have you been through a regulatory exam? We are seeing a distinct difference if it's your second go around with regulators, where the first time they were kind of happy to see a plan or a process in place, but the second time around now they're starting to ask a few more questions, picking and prodding a little bit about your process. It doesn't appear, right, that there really is any concerns about what you're doing. They simply want to know what you are doing. And so the idea is if you don't document what you're doing with, say, Q factors or changes to your Q factors, or if you don't have anything in your reserve for the unfunded commitments, you're going to get inquiries, right? They're going to ask you questions about it. Again, it's not suggesting that they have any issues with it, but they do want to better understand what drives a change in your Q factor. They don't want the change just to happen without some accompanying or narrative or explanation for it. With the unfunded commitments, again, it may be perfectly acceptable to have 0 in there, but increasingly, if you don't, they're going to ask you why you don't. And so again, just being prepared for that reality is really kind of what we're seeing. And so I think it just kind of begs the question, or just the kind of makes us kind of tee up is, every year we kind of review policies or, for our board or perhaps even just for management teams. And I think as you do that this year, then you kind of want to think about it for multiple audiences, right? You want to think about it for not only your board, perhaps your management team, but also regulators and auditors, right? And so as you're going through all these steps, just think about, making sure there's documentation, there's narrative if necessary, to just, again, better leave a breadcrumb trail of kind of what's going into your inputs, assumptions, changes in Q factors, et cetera. Steve, anything you want to jump in here and add?
No, it's just this is something that we always anticipated would be happening in this sort of second round of examinations since since CECL came on board. Whereas the NCUA told us explicitly that in their first round of examinations, they were really going to be looking for a good faith effort, right? When it comes to things like unfunded commitments, right? A smaller kind of secondary part of your reserve. In the first round of exams, they were just checking to see if you had considered calculating a reserve for your unfunded commitments, and weren't diving too much deeper than that in their examinations. But as they told us would happen, and as we have been seeing in the latter half of last year and the beginning of this year, is that in this newer round of examinations, they're taking their exams a step further as far as the depth of analysis, looking at the unfunded commitments, for example, and looking at some of the assumptions and questioning them and seeing if you've documented, assumptions about probability of funding and unconditionally cancelable amounts, and looking at some of the assumptions with a little bit higher degree of scrutiny than they did early in 2023. And we've been seeing that come to play over the last few months. And so the best suggestion we could make, and we say this a lot, is that you get points for paper, right? For making notes wherever you have changes in qualitative factor adjustments. If you've decreased a Q factor adjustment, there's nothing wrong with that at all, but it's a flag. It's a type of thing that examiners are going to, if they see it, they're going to look for a documentation, a discussion of why it was appropriate. And if you don't have anything there, that's going to cause them to dig deeper and deeper. And so, getting out ahead of these things and making those notes and having that documentation is critical. Because a lot of times when the examiners, we found, come to us and are digging a lot deeper and asking a lot of questions, it's not necessarily because they're criticizing your end result, right? What your reserve level is. They just simply, they can't check the box and move on if they see things that they think are out of the ordinary and may require an explanation, and simply don't have that explanation attached and easy for them to find.
Yeah,
John?
and I think that's the, again, we want to emphasize here, they're not suggesting when they ask these questions that you're doing anything wrong or that there's a problem with it. They just want to see what you're doing, right? And so that's why I said points for paper is going to help eliminate or alleviate any of the questions that they're going to have by just having some type of framework or explanation when you do make changes, particularly to your Q factors as you go forward. And as we saw in the polling questions, right? We think we're going to have higher reserves at the end of the year. We expect past dues to go up. That may not materialize in charge-offs, but again, we might end up changing our Q factors based on that type of outlook. Why you do it is explaining that, right? We just think, hey, we're in a little bit more difficult economic time. Our members are having, issues, whatever it is. You just want to make sure you're sharing some type of explanation around those changes.
Yeah.
As we continue to go, we're trying to be thoughtful and responsive to changes and enhancements to the tool. We try to make you aware of those throughout, during these coffee talks. We do have a few things, on the board that we're working on. So Steve's just going to, touch on a couple of those here. Steve, you want to take it away?
Yeah. So most of these are things that we have mentioned on recent coffee talks that we have done since it's been a couple months now. The only thing that's completely new that we're about to go through, and I'm going to share a screen with in just a second, is scenario organization and management tool. Some of our, our tool's been around for a good while. We've had users that have been using it for a few years at this point, creating multiple scenarios every quarter, or even calculating, creating scenarios on a monthly basis. And so at this point, many of you probably have a very long drop-down list of scenarios when you go to find a scenario, and it becomes harder for you to find what you're looking for and keep it organized. So we built a tool around that. And actually everything else we'll just kind of go through here so why don't we just start flipping through the screens.
Yeah, and I think just before we go, I just want to emphasize these are always optional, right? There's nothing that is impacting the analysis or anything we're doing. These are all just hopefully user enhancements to make your experience better. So, but nothing's impacting the tool itself.
Yeah.
All right, Steve.
The video resource library has been there for a little while now, and I encourage you to keep looking at it when you utilize the tool. We're adding new video clips of discussions that we've had. We have the helpful hints on each different tab of the tool with hints that are, or tips that are pertinent to that particular section of CECL. And if you want to see the comprehensive list, you can just click on the header there where it says helpful hints. That'll open up a pop-up box that kind of shows all of the video resources. A lot of them have come from these previous coffee talks where we kind of clip a section of a few minutes where we've discussed a topic in greater detail, either amongst Sean and I, or with a question that came up on the coffee talk, or with the auditors who have joined us in the past, or some other audience. That should be really your go-to point. For example, if you have a question about, we just added a video resource for the our Q factor decision support matrix, which is an Excel template that we have up there that we allow you guys to download and sort of make your own, and it helps provide a framework for qualitative factor calculations and adjustments and revisions over time. And so we put up a video discussing how that works and how you can interact with it. But that's kind of a living, breathing library, and we encourage you to keep keeping an eye out for additions to it.
Mm-hmm.
We've shown this a few times now, just kind of reminding everyone, we did a slight reorganization or reordering of some of the tabs there on the CECLSolver, just to kind of keep it intuitive and kind of flowing from left to right, those first, they have a summary tab, and then the next 4 tabs are really the meat of the analysis for your loan portfolio. And then some of the secondary or elements of your ACL, like unfunded commitments and held maturity securities, if you have any, are there in green. And then finally the peer trends, the public peer data, as well as all those CECLSolver user trends from our hundreds of credit unions who are using the tool, with detailed warm calculations or averages and ranges of qualitative factor adjustments for all of your peers that are using the tool at the segment level, and also some collected pool reserve levels as well. So that's just kind of reorganized there to help you follow it from left to right. Next. This is something that nobody has seen yet. It's brand new. It's going to be available next week, I believe. Right now, like as I mentioned, there's a single drop-down box on the left there where you click and all your scenarios are just kind of thrown in that one list. We had lots of customers who asked us if we could provide some ordering and organization and a management tool of all those scenarios because it was getting a little bit overwhelming for some of our users. So that's what we have created. And like I said, I believe it's either next Monday or the following Monday that this will be live. You can see that when you click on the scenario management tool, you'll get a pop-up box. It shows, it orders all of your scenarios that you've created by year. So when you've most recently saved or modified them by year. And when you expand a year, say 2025, you can see all the scenarios that have been created for your institution this year with the name that you created it with, when it was created, who created it, what username from your bank created the scenario, or if you were working with one of us, it might say our name, and when it was last updated. If you had modified it multiple times, and it'll show the most recently updated date and then who modified it most recently. So that'll just help you guys kind of keep it straight and keep it ordered. So this is something we mentioned on the call a couple months ago. We're still working out the kinks in it, but we wanted to provide a little bit more ways of looking at your peers' loss trends over time. The way our tool currently is, we have a single methodology for calculating peer average loss trends over time. And what we wanted to add was the ability to sort of stress your peers' loss rates. So for example, if you're making qualitative factor adjustments and one of the things you're considering is what your peers' loss rate was compared to yours, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. That's why we have this data in here in the first place. But if the peer averages don't have, your peers aren't seeing very many losses at the average or median kind of level, then you might want to see, well, what are my peers' loss trends have looked like at the 75th percentile or the 90th percentile over time? And so what we're doing is allowing you the ability to choose any percentile loss rate that you want to see either on the whole portfolio or on each segment of the portfolio. I realize the segmentation here is from commercial banks on their call report, so just ignore that for now. It's just a screenshot. Obviously, it'll have the NCUA call report segments in here when it's completed, but it just allows you to, like I said, stress your peers' loss rates over time historically, so that if you want to keep your reserve level for, let's say, C&I or commercial loans, or for new vehicles or used vehicles above your peer average by a certain amount, you can more objectively find out what that amount is, as opposed to saying, well, my peers are reserved at 80 basis points on their new vehicle loans, and we want to be higher, so we're gonna make it 90 basis points. Now you can say at the 80th percentile they were at 1.2%, and so we're kind of aiming for that. So just giving you more objective peer data trends for you to hang your hat on, right, when you're asked to justify your loss rates and how they're changing over time. Sean?
Yeah, and I think that's the point to emphasize, right? This just really does take out some of the subjectivity on why you might change a Q factor or make an adjustment based on peer information. Now you can really specifically say, either again, better or worse. We perform better than our peers, so we're gonna use loss rates at somewhere between ours and the median. But if we're trying to be more protective, or if we anticipate greater losses, taking a different percentile. But it just takes the subjectivity out of it, that we're going to specifically target a percentile level. And so again, an optional tool, but we just feel like gives you better information. But as Steve pointed out, it's objective information. It's real, based on real information. And so it just adds the element of truly being objective and actual historical data.
This is something that we've had on the tool for a while now, but has just been updated with 2025 data. What this is, just to refresh everyone's memory, is once a year, the Federal Reserve comes out with their economic scenarios for stress testing, those DFAST stress tests that the larger institutions have to fill out on a regular basis. And what they did was, in that very large, voluminous annual report that they put out, they do a bunch of surveying of all of their different economists and come up with a 3-year quarterly projections for some of these most important economic trends. And then they do a sort of a kind of a worst case scenario, hypothetical scenario for how those trends could all look a lot worse under a stressed environment. And so once a year they put out that it's got quarterly historical economic trends going all the way back in time through the end of the year, and then 3 years going forward on a quarterly basis. So 12 quarterly projections. And this is a great tool to have in your back pocket for examiners and auditors who are asking for, what economic data trends did you consider when coming to your Q factor adjustment conclusions and, expected losses moving forward. So every February, about middle of the month in February, they update this for the next year. So up until a couple of weeks ago, 2024 were projections, and 2023 was the end of the historical stuff. Now, this is live on our site as of a few days ago. So 2025, 26, and 27 are all projected in there for, some of these critical indicators, right? Real GDP growth projections, disposable income growth, CPI, inflation, treasury rates, prime rates, et cetera. And so it's a great tool to see back in time how these trends have gone, kind of consensus actual projections or forecasts is what they call the baseline scenario. Those are actual projections. The severely adverse scenario is not a projection. It's not an expectation of what's actually going to happen. It is simply a hypothetical severely adverse scenario to see how bad it could get. So we just want to make that very clear. If you're looking for where the economists expect these trends to go, it's not somewhere in between the baseline and the severely adverse. It is the baseline scenario. Sean?
Yeah, and I think that's again to emphasize what we wanted to share with you, as Steve pointed out, right? The baseline scenario, again, a lot of times you might be asked for economic data as part of your Q factor narrative. We wanted to be able to provide you with some, again, actual real data and from the Fed economists, and that can give you some real economic projections for your Q factor analysis. As Steve said, the severely adverse is really almost in terms of a stress test, right? What could you could you survive that? That's less important for what we're doing here in the CECL analysis, but it does give you a perspective of the scenarios that they're asking the largest banks in the country to potentially make sure they have adequate capital for. But I think for most of us day to day, click on the baseline scenario. It gives you real national forecasted economic projections, which again you can incorporate into any Q factor analysis that you might be doing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, this is just a reminder that that data is not updated right now. It's just a screenshot from our warm estimator tool, just reminding you guys that we do get that data from the NCUA and publish it each quarter. Guidance for peer warm values and prepayment values. Now, keep in mind that the guidance that we're getting, the data that the NCUA has contracted out to collect and aggregate and share on a quarterly basis, is a limited set of institutions, smaller credit unions, I believe under $100 million in assets, but from a wide swath across the country. So they are reasonable starting points. The warm values, I think most of you are probably either calculating your own warms or having us calculate them for you. But if you're using the ones from the NCUA as they provide them, pretty much the first couple of days of each quarter, we'll have the updated warm values out there, not only in the warm estimator tool itself, the Excel tool, but also on our interactive CECLSolver as well. So you don't have to go and re-download the Excel based warm estimator tool, the entire file each quarter just to get those. If you go to if you open up a scenario and then choose to auto populate the warms, like we've shown a bunch of times in the past, you'll be able to pull down those most recent quarter warms right there and see them right in the interactive tool if you kind of rely on those. even if you're not using the NCUA data for the actual warm calculations, if you're using us or you're doing it yourselves, those prepayment estimates that they also have are a great tool, because when you're calculating your warms, or when we're calculating your warms, we rely, as a starting point at least, on the prepayment estimates that are furnished by the NCUA. Not very many credit unions, reasonable size, non-gigantic credit unions, are regularly doing segment level, multi-period prepayment studies, right? And so relying on that data, even just as an input to your warm calculations, can be really helpful. And so we continue to monitor and update that each quarter, and all the 1231 stuff is up there and available.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah. This is something we've talked about and we've shown you guys over a while now. Again, we continue to aggregate all of our CECLSolver user trends and show you, kind of directionally speaking, at the segment level for all of our hundreds of credit unions that are using our tool, what direction their the warms are going in, up, down, sideways, what directions Q factors are headed in, and what directions your collective pool reserves to your loans have been going from our user base. And again, we do this because there's very little data, good data for this type of stuff at the segment level, and we can find reserves to loans for the whole portfolio for an entire peer group. It's pretty easy to do, something you can pull up in our Excel add-in in 30 seconds. But looking at this data at the segment level is not public information. And so providing those proprietary trends, as long as we have a large enough database to do that, and we'll show you in the next slide, our database is very robust and continuing to grow each quarter, can be very helpful in and showing you a range too, right? Not just showing you the average of the median, but hey, here's the range of warms or Q factors or collective pool reserves that new vehicle loans are in right now for your peers, 25th to 75th percentile. And knowing that, kind of doing a sanity check to see if your reserve is, or your Q factor adjustment is, less than the 25th percentile or well above the 75th percentile, that at least it suggests maybe some additional, a deeper look or a more thorough analysis of why that might be the case. John?
Steve, we had a question in the chat about the NCUA table and where they can find that you referenced.
Oh, so the prepayment data is only going to be in the warm estimator tool, but the warm values from them. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Hold on.
All right.
All right, right here, if I click on the loan portfolio summary, and here are where I'm plugging in all my warms. This is a fresh scenario. If I click on the pre-populate button, the warms, and I click on a methodology, and I say I want the peer-based data. So this is all the NCUA data right here. And this is all these are averages for all of our few hundred CECLSolver users. But the regulatory study, that's the NCUA data. And if I choose 12/31/2024 and click apply, these right here are the NCUA's published quarterly fourth quarter warms for each segment of the portfolio directly from their database. If I wanted to look at our CECLSolver user data for the same period of time, apply, they're going to be relatively close. They're going to be relatively similar. So that's the kind of the quickest way you can see that data right on the interactive tool. Otherwise, if you go to the knowledge base and you download the warm estimator tool right here, there's a tab right on the warm estimator tool that has all the NCUA data as well, just like in that screenshot that I showed. So either or place wise.
Perfect. All right. Let me go ahead and grab the screen back here. There we go. Okay. Steve touched on the database. Steve, anything you want to add here other than you collected a lot of
Yeah, so we're up to 480 different credit unions have been using the CECLSolver tool from 47 states now. We got our 47th state in there. So it's a point is it's a very robust database. We have credit unions from under 10 million to over 9 billion. Average size is about 275 million plus or minus. You guys, y'all, I guess down here, have collectively run over 7,000 scenarios in the tool and 150,000 segment level scenarios. So that's all the data that goes into the table and chart that I just showed you on the previous slide. Just so you have an idea, it's probably a larger database and data set of institutions, honestly, than what the NCUA is using for their for their study of warm data and whatnot. So it's great to have this as a resource with our proprietary data and also the NCUA's data as well. All right, this is something we showed about a year ago or so and hadn't updated since then, but we wanted to just give you some more breakdowns of reserve and credit trends over the recent past. And so what I did here, and I did this using our Excel add-in tool. And so for those of you who are interested in pulling this kind of data on custom peer groups or standard peer groups, or really diving into this kind of comparative data, we are working on adding a lot more of these tools for credit unions to our interactive site, but some of it is available already right now in our Excel add-in tool. But what I did was I took total reserves to loans and broke it down by NCUA peer group and tracked it over time. And so interestingly enough, the largest and the smallest credit unions have the highest reserves to loans. The ones under $10 million in assets right now are averaging 95 basis points in reserve to loans. And the ones over 500 million in assets are averaging 94. Whereas the 10 to 50, 50 to 100, and 100 to 500 are in the 60s and 70s. So a significantly higher reserve to loans for the largest credit unions. One might consider them maybe they're having some of the riskiest portfolios, the most exotic portfolios, the heaviest regulatory scrutiny, all those things leading to potentially higher required reserves, and some of the smallest credit unions. And then I also went ahead and just looking trend wise, we saw a slight increase in reserves to loans in the fourth quarter amongst all asset classes, but we haven't seen a very large increase. And I would say that the increase in past due loans and charge-offs at credit unions, so the deterioration of the asset quality so far over the past year or so has far outstripped the increase, if any, real in the reserve level. So we've seen reserves to non-performing assets kind of decrease from their almost, skyrocketed levels to come down some over the past year. We also were curious from a regional standpoint if we saw any significant difference in reserve levels from Eastern credit unions, Southern credit unions, and Western credit unions. Now, the reason I broke it down by these three regions is because that's how the NCUA considers things, right? They kind of reorganized themselves a few years ago into those three regions. But looking at the data, not seeing a lot of significant difference or discrepancy between those three regions, probably just not detailed enough. So my next step in analysis is going to be breaking that out into more detailed, Northwest, Southwest, Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, and try to get some more granularity in the regions and see if we see any particular trends that are regionally based. But at these high level regions, we're not seeing a whole lot of difference between different credit unions. Sean?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing here, again, Steve touched on, right? Everything is up, or year over year, which again is kind of consistent with what everybody kind of answered and replied to in the polling questions, and probably, anticipate even going a touch higher this year. But you can kind of see this borne out even going back to, March of 23 to where we are today. Every category of asset bucket, higher reserves than they had, just a couple of years ago.
So interestingly, I'd say the reserves increased by more in 2023 than they did in 2024, whereas asset quality issues have been much more in 2024 than 2023. So yeah, you might suggest that CECL is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing.
Right.
Reserves going up in anticipation of future not yet realized credit quality issues. So you could argue that this is exactly what they had hoped would happen.
Exactly.
Now, This is something we've talked about in the past. I haven't updated it for you guys in the last couple quarters, but wanted to do so. This is about unfunded commitments. So we looked at all of the 4,800 plus or minus credit unions in the country, and we just wanted to see, you know, from a statistical standpoint, how many institutions were really we're calculating a reserve on the unfunded commitments separately on the liability side of the balance sheet, like you're being asked to do under CECL, and we're never asked to do until the first quarter of 2023. It wasn't even a line item on your call report until first quarter of 2023. Now, at that point, in the first quarter, I believe there was about 95% of institutions, of credit unions, were just not calculating a reserve on the unfunded commitment. And when that says percent reporting zero, that means the percent of all the credit unions that have unfunded commitments, right? Not just all credit unions. So in June 30th of 2023, 91% of all credit unions that had unfunded commitments still were reporting no reserve for them. Fast forward to the end of last year, it's been slowly trickling down, but not nearly as fast as it has been at commercial banks. In fact, commercial community banks were at similar levels a couple years ago as credit unions, and now only 35% of commercial banks are still not calculating a reserve for their unfunded commitments, and that's because we've seen the FDIC and the bank examiners be much more forceful in sort of requiring that their institutions take a more detailed look at the unfunded commitments. We haven't seen quite that level of determination from the NCUA yet, but we're starting to see it. As you can see, it's trickled down now. You know, 85% of credit unions who have unfunded commitments are still reporting zero for the unfunded reserve for that unfunded commitment, whether they're padding the reserves a little bit for the funded portfolio or just not considering it meaningful enough in order to put a number there. We can't say. But obviously a much higher percentage of our users on the call today are calculating a reserve on the unfunded commitment. Part of that is because you have a tool to do that, to help you do that. At least I'd like to think that's part of the reason, but nationally speaking, it's still very low. And then we looked at, you know, if you look at median reserve compared to total unfunded commitments, it's zero. But if you subtract out the 85% that aren't reporting anything, if you only look at, you know, for those 15% of credit unions that are calculating a reserve on unfunded commitments, how much of a reserve are you calculating? And the answer is about 5 basis points median, and about 13 basis points at the 75th percentile. So only 25% of credit unions of the 15% that are calculating our reserve at all are calculating more than 13 basis points reserve for the unfunded commitment. So I think probably most of you on the call are doing more than that, and so you should be patted on the back for doing so, possibly, or
Absolutely.
not patted on the back. There's nothing inappropriate necessarily. You know, CECL doesn't say you have to have a significant reserve on unfunded commitments. It says you have to consider whether it's appropriate, and if so, at what level. And knowing that it's not something that the NCUA has looked at all before 2 years ago, and it's not something that they've scrutinized heavily until very recently. But we expect these trends, the percent reporting zero, to continue to decrease over time. We don't know. I would have expected, honestly, the reserve levels for those reporting it, we would have seen that trickle up a little bit, but they've remained pretty flat where they are.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think eventually the examiners will probably do it, but you know, we'll continue to monitor it, but certainly seen it on the bank side, but not so much yet with the NCAA.
This is not a suggestion that you all start giving them more than they ask for. It's just,
that's right.
It's just right. We're just showing you where we've seen the trends moving.
Exactly. All right. So
there was one more. There was an Excel file I wanted to share. I didn't get it into the thing, but I'm gonna do it for just a second here. We showed you some trends in credit union trends in reserve levels and unfunded commitment levels, but we didn't show you any direct analysis of asset quality, and wanted to just briefly do that. It's coming from my Excel add-in tool here. I'm going to share it If something right now is only available in the Excel add-in tool, but we are working, as I mentioned, on having a lot more credit union industry trends available in our interactive software in the near future. So more to come on that in a couple months. But what I did here is I pulled all the credit unions in NCUA Peer Group 5. So all the 100 to $500 million credit unions in the country, there are almost exactly 1,100 of you guys, of them. And if I look at median, this is delinquent loans to total loans. So percentage of delinquent loans to total loans. And I looked at it over the last 8 quarters. So median delinquent loans to total loans was 36 basis points when we first started with CECL in the first quarter of 2023. It is now 67 basis points. So median delinquent loans have effectively doubled since CECL became the law of the land. Reserves have gone up from 65 basis points to 85 basis points, and delinquent loans have gone from 36 basis points to 67 basis points. This is mean levels, 48 to 85. You'll notice there's always some sort of seasonality, cyclicality to delinquent loan calculations. They tend to peak at the end of a year, as we all know, and then decline some in the following year. So that's why you see here in this trend line, pretty much every one of them dropped in the first quarter of 2024, but that was not a lingering or a trend that would continue. They immediately started on their way back up. So if you compare fourth quarter of this year to fourth quarter of last year, we've seen a sustained increase in delinquent loans amongst medium-sized credit unions over the past couple of years. And so it's interesting to see the interplay between the increase in delinquencies and the increase in reserves. Sean?
Yeah. Again, working as it should be. Okay. Let me, oops, we have a question come in here. Would that drop also be an uptick in charge-offs? Also be for an uptick in charge-offs, maybe?
Yes, absolutely. I would say more than any other metrics, charge-offs tend to peak in Q4 and drop statistically, amongst large numbers of institutions in the first quarter. So we see delinquent loans and other at a point in time, right? Like past due loans or non-accrual or delinquent loans like that. They drop some in the first quarter of each year, but charge-offs peak very much in the fourth quarter and then drop in the first quarter. So if you're out there in April trying to make an argument for an increase in credit quality across the board because net charge-offs drop from Q4 to Q1, it's a tough row to hoe because it's typically just a seasonality type thing. Charge-offs, you very much want to look at this quarter versus the same quarter in the previous year to see what direction they're headed in. Yeah. The reason we show delinquent loans and not charge-offs is just because looking at percentile ranks for net charge-offs, they're still very, very low, right? They're still relatively negligible for a lot of credit unions. So in order to see where the directionally where we're headed, we want to look upstream for when something hits the balance sheet and look at when it first hits the call report as being, past a certain number of days delinquent.
Correct.
It's a more leading indicator.
Yep. Go ahead again. If you have any questions you want to go ahead and submit, we'll take those now. In the meanwhile, again, any of the past recordings are found on the website, on the YouTube channel. You can see replays from just about everything we've done over the past few years. In April, we'll be back with our next Coffee Talk. We'll be pleased to welcome our dear friend Paul Allen from Saltmarsh to join us and have him share his perspectives on what they're seeing in the accounting firm and the auditing world for CECL. So we always look forward to having Paul on our Coffee Talks. So, certainly register for his appearance in April. A couple of other webinars we'll be doing, one just on liquidity management in March, and then one on lead generation as well in March. So a couple of those to go ahead and register. Remember, if you register, you'll always receive a copy of the slides and a link to any of the recordings for those presentations. I don't see any additional questions or chats. Steve, anything to add before we let everyone have their day and the weekend?
No, nothing. I think we've touched on everything CECL related. I could start talking about Wake Forest basketball and our hopes for the NCAA tournament and how I feel about the net rankings, but I'm not going to go into that. We don't have that kind of time.
Fair enough. It is that time of the year. March Madness will be upon us shortly.
That it is.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for joining us today. We appreciate it as always. Let me see. Duke all the way.
Kelly, we'll have a talk later on. You see that? That's Wake Forest. That's Carolina. You do not notice a Duke one. I live on Tobacco Road. I'm just a couple miles off of I-40 here, over by NC State. But yeah, I went to Wake Forest, and my wife went to Carolina, and so we are an ABD, an anybody but Duke family. I hope that doesn't influence your subscription to Quick Analytics, but I have to be honest. All right, I see where we're at.
Well, thank you all very much. Let me just make sure. Oh, there's one here in the Q&A. Yes, we will send out a copy of the slides today. It'll be in an email that will likely go later today or early Monday morning with a copy of the slides and a link to the recording. So we will get those out to everybody, and they also include the results of the polling questions. But thank you all again for joining us. Have a great day and weekend, and we will see you on the next Coffee Talk. Thanks much. Bye now.
Thanks, everybody.